Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Belonging series, which is Imperial as One's series where we investigate the experiences of individuals from within the Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities. And this week, I'm really happy that we have with us our guest, David Comissiong. And David is a Vincentian political activist and a former Barbadian commissioner for Pan-African affairs. And he's going to be joining us today to discuss his journey into belonging and what's has highlighted his career to date. So David, it's just wonderful to have you with us today. And I normally start off the questioning by asking you a little bit about your early childhood and how that helped to shape who you are now and your sense of belonging and identity.
Thank you, Wayne. It's a real pleasure to be here. Well, you know, my whole adult life has really been about nation building, social justice activism, PanAfricanism, and so if I am to trace back the roots, I would say that the fact that I was the son of a Methodist minister of religion and growing up in a home where my father kind of exemplified the fundamental values, the values of service to humanity, the fundamental Christian values, I would say that that has had a lasting impression on my personality. I also was very fortunate to have a pan-Caribbean childhood experience. I was born in St. Vincent, but I left St. Vincent at the age of 6. I moved to Trinidad, where I did my primary education before moving to Barbados. So that has prepared me well. Right now, I'm Barbados's ambassador to the Caribbean community and non-resident high commissioner to several Caribbean countries. So that has roots in my childhood. And then in Trinidad, I lived in Trinidad in the heart of Port of Spain at a very pivotal time in the history of that country, the time of the 1970 Black Power Revolution. So as a 10-year-old, 10 going on to 11, living in that environment, I really had a front row seat to the Black Power Rebellion and all of the education that went with that. So I would say that those are some of the roots of the adult career that I have had over the past 35 to 40 years.
So there was, I like the way that you put that in terms of you're a child of the Caribbean, because you've kind of like lived in so many places and each one left something different with you. So born in St. Vincent, then going across to Barbados, Trinidad, and then to Barbados. And when you were in Trinidad, there was the whole uprising. How tell me, as a 10-year-old, you had front row seat, as it were. So what was it that influenced you there? Because it's a really impressionable age. What was it about that whole experience?
Well, you know, where I lived, as I said, right almost in the heart of Port of Spain. So as a child, we would see the Black Power demonstrations. As school children, we had our own Black Power demonstration. Maybe we marched around our primary school with our fists in the air, shouting "power!" You know? Right. And but then I lived at a place called Victoria Square. So you know, there were older boys and young men, and you know, in those days, the square was like a park. It was a park, so everyone gathered in the park. And as little boys, we would ask questions. We would be hearing we were hearing words, for example, a honky. So we would ask the bigger boys, so what is a honky?
Yeah.
And they would tell us, well, they would explain to us that a honky is a color prejudiced white person, and they would point out who around Victoria Square fits that definition of a honky. So, Black Power, power to the people. So it was an education for us as little children. It was a very exciting time. State of emergency, curfews, the schools were closed. The army mutinied. After the army mutiny was put down, the soldiers were put on trial. I lived, as I said, right in Port of Spain. So I used to see, I went to the public library. The Supreme Court was right next to the public library, and you would see the trial taking place, all the military personnel, all of that, So for an impressionable 10, 11-year-old,
Yeah.
your eyes are being opened, you're seeing quite a bit. And then immediately after that experience, my family was moved to, my father, Methodist minister, was transferred to Barbados, where we went to live in a very upscale, almost gated residential area full of European expatriates, elite Barbadian whites, elite Barbadian browns and blacks. And so coming from that experience in Trinidad into that very kind of restrictive class and race environment was again shaped my personality, because as a young teenager, I rebelled against the ethos of that residential area, and I brought with me, I brought my family, not just me, my brothers and I. We brought with us the kind of culture that we had imbibed in Port of Spain, Trinidad. So I tell people that my social activism didn't begin as an adult. It began as a teenager, kind of confronting some of those race and class contradictions that I saw very close up as a young teenager growing up in Barbados.
So a lot of your experience came from that whole notion of you were having front row seats of the uprising, the political and the legal ramifications, and then you're transported or translocated into an environment which was, it was kind of like almost the polar opposite. Am I right to say?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Barbados 1971, Barbados just 5 years into its independence journey. Barbados back then known as Little England. And I am living, the Methodist Church had made this decision. Usually the manse tended to be next to the church, right in the heart of the community. But the Methodist Church in Barbados had made this decision to invest in, I guess, what would be valuable residential property. So they had purchased this house for the minister in this relatively exclusive area back in 1971. And yes, so I'll give you a little anecdote. My neighbors, my immediate neighbors was a white family, and so white boys my age, we became friends.
Yeah.
But I would see these guys from the nearby black working class area playing cricket and football on a pasture, quite nearby. So I said to my new white friends, let's go and play with those boys. And they said to me, no, we can't play with those boys. I said, oh, why can't you play with those boys? I said, well, because they're black. So I said to them, well, but you play with me, aren't I black too? They said, no, but you are different. So I never accepted I was different. In fact, I was determined to prove to them that I was not different. So I promptly made friends with those working class guys, brought them into this exclusive residential area, and we established the kind of so I lost the friendship. I lost the friendship of the white friends, you know. But we back then, some of us, we established this by multi-class group of boys. You know, we grew up together. We went through adolescence together. Boys from the working class housing area and the kind of upper middle class area. And you know, so I often had battles with the white residents of the place where I live, the place called Highgate Gardens. You know, these are my friends. You can't tell them that they can't come into this area. You know, so that was my adolescence. You know, kind of fighting as a child, fighting some of those battles, and that's been the life of that's been the story of my whole adult life. You know, I've basically been involved in activism for my whole adult life. I'm an attorney at law by profession, so I established a kind of people's law practice, and that's the role I've played, defending powerless people, challenging the power structures, whether it be the government, you know, the big white establishment here, Barbados, and so forth. And I've also always been involved from the very beginnings of my adult career. I've been very much involved in PanAfricanism, and you know, everything about ourselves as an African people, trying to forge links with the African continent and our Caribbean movement. So that has been my life: social justice, Caribbean nationalism, and Africanism. We could probably sum it up with those three phrases.
Because I love the way that you've articulated your pathway. I wanted to just explore something a little bit further with you, which was this whole notion of, for some people, being the son of a minister and being placed into the environment which you were, some would say that you were one of the privileged, okay? And not oftentimes, but sometimes those who have that privilege then don't necessarily recognize the struggle which others who are less privileged have. Okay, and I know that you had your experience with it in Trinidad, the uprising, and so it gave you an inner spirit, as it were. But still, some people would turn away. What was it that made you stay? What was it about the whole notion that kept you interested, passionate, and an activist right up till now?
You know, that's almost that's a very good question. I don't even know if I can answer that, because you know, throughout my whole career, people have been predicting. They say, "Oh, it's only a matter of time. You know, you will change." I've been hearing that from, you know, I was very fortunate as a young man. I was actually appointed to the Senate in Barbados at the age of 26. At that time, I was the youngest senator in the history of Barbados, and you know, people were always saying, you know, it's only a matter of time. You're going to change. But here I am. I'm now 61, and you know, I've been consistent on my journey. I can only say that my father was a very special human being. I mean, my father is really the best man I've ever known. You know, a really great representative of the Christian gospel, very enlightened, and very willing to acknowledge the contradictions of the church and so forth. So my exposure to that kind of religion was of a very honest and elevated vision of it, coming from this Methodist minister who served the church and served the Caribbean in eight different Caribbean islands over a long and distinguished period of 60 years, you know. So I think I was very fortunate I think I was very fortunate in my upbringing, the kind of father and mother that I had, and the examples that were really set before me. You know, I'm not a big church goer. My father passed in 2010,
Hmm.
but I think the influence of growing up under his guidance has really marked my personality and has stayed with me. You know, that's the best I can perhaps explain it.
No, no, that's fine. I'm not sure there's a really strong echo today. That whole notion, not notion, but that in the Bible, I know it says, train up a child in the way that he shall go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. And it sounds like your father's training, the example, and it's not just the training based on what you've just said. It wasn't just about the training in terms of you do this. It was
Oh,
living
no.
example.
My father believed in, for him, God was the beloved father. He believed in the gospel of love, you know. So
Mhm.
as things as a child, I could see other guys, other boys doing, I just couldn't do because, not because I didn't want to do them, but I just had so much respect for my father that I didn't want to do anything that could cause him any embarrassment, you know.
Yeah,
So it was that kind of loving nurture, not this harsh do
yeah,
this and that. No.
yeah. That's fantastic. So going on into, you studied law, you because you was an attorney, or you are an attorney. Um, how did you see law being a vehicle for change? What was it about that particular profession?
Well, to be honest, I think even back then I always had in mind perhaps a career in politics and leadership, you know.
Hmm.
And law was kind of the natural path to that in the Caribbean back then. But as a lawyer, you quickly became aware that you had two options. You could become part of the establishment. I mean, I had many opportunities to become part of the establishment, to work for the establishment, to make a lot of money.
Hmm.
I had many opportunities. Or you could become a minister of justice. You know, you could use your professional skills to represent those at the bottom of the society, and to stand to challenge the society for social justice. And that's the path I found myself taking. Again, I mean, it's just part of my personality, to want to side with the underdog, you
Hmm.
know, to want to go up against the powerful and the comfortable. I guess I saw that as a child, as a teenager, in Highgate Gardens. It always disturbed me. The black maids, these, you will see them, and they'll be walking to or from their place of work, walking home in the late evening. Sometimes it's just these silent black women, and you got a sense of a society that took people for granted, that didn't recognize them, almost didn't see their humanity,
Yeah,
and the injustice of that. So
yeah.
something about a society that, with those entrenched race and class structures, always offended me. And to tell the truth, as a younger man, I think I perhaps was guilty of even deliberately and consciously challenging the Barbadian society, saying things that some might even find outrageous, but just prod it out of that sense of complacency on issues pertaining to race and class. So as a young activist, I provoked a lot of powerful sentiments,
Hmm.
for and against. I guess now I'm somewhat more mature, and may not needle as much. But now I'm in a position really, after all those years of activism and striving and even controversy, I'm in a position now to see a lot of what I agitated around for so long really coming to fruition, coming to culmination. And I'm very fortunate to find myself in a position where I can help to cement some of those advances, and bring them to concrete reality.
The kind of like the title of this series is Belonging, right? And one of the questions that I suppose I'd like to just investigate with you is this notion: did you ever have a sense that you belonged? Because sometimes if you felt that you would belong, you wouldn't necessarily be poking, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, I have always felt that I belonged to Barbados and the Caribbean and to the African world. I from early on, I recognized that there were things in our society that we had to overcome that were holding us back from being what we ought to be. But I never lost sight of our intrinsic value and what our ultimate destination was, and the role that I have to play in bringing about that destination. So I'm a real believer in personal responsibility. I've never been one to simply sit on the sidelines and criticize. If there are shortcomings, I have a personal responsibility to help to overcome those shortcomings. And in fact, I'm only entitled to criticize if I am actually trying to do something of substance myself to overcome those shortcomings. So I have always fully committed myself to my country, to my region. I mean, I won a Barbados, what we call a Barbados exhibition. It's a scholarship, and I really could have used that scholarship to go and study in any part of the world, paid for by the Barbados government. But I chose to do my university education right here in the Caribbean. Similarly, my daughter, my daughter is a Barbados scholar, and chose to do her medical training right at the Mona campus in Jamaica. So I've kind of inculcated those values in my children. We are Caribbean nationalists. We are going to build the Caribbean nation. We are going to build the Caribbean civilization. This is what we are committed to. I'm also Pan-Africanist. My wife is an African woman from Ghana. I just evolved in that direction. And we are going to, so we live it. We live the Pan-African experience, even in terms of my own individual family. We have made those links across the Atlantic with the continent of Africa, and we are going to build that bridge between. We're going to reverse the Middle Passage. This is something I've been committed to my whole adult life, that we are going to restore that relationship with the African continent. And right now, I'm in a position to help pilot Caricom, our Caribbean community, to develop that relationship with the African Union, the integration organization of the African continent. Yes.
Can you just expand a little bit for some who may not fully understand what Caricom does and how that it can be used as a vehicle for reconnection and that gaining that sense of belonging to the mother country, as it were, or the motherland?
Caricom is like the European Union of the Caribbean. So just like the European Union, it's an integration mechanism that brings together 15 Caricom countries as full members of the community, and we have 5 associate members. These are territories that are still in some kind of colonial relationship with Britain, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, etc. But the 15 full members are all 14 independent states, and one still a colony, Montserrat still a colony. So all the major territories, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Haiti, Suriname, Guyana, you name them. And so we come together. We do a lot of functional cooperation. We have 18 institutions of Caricom dealing with everything from education to agricultural development, to disaster response, tourism development, you name it, climate change. We have 8 associate institutions like the University of the West Indies, the Caribbean Development Bank, etc. So we do functional cooperation. We coordinate our foreign policies. We are a customs union, a free trade area among ourselves, and we are developing a single market and single economy. So kind of like the European Union, we're trying to come together in every way possible, short of being one nation state. So we still maintain our separate island sovereignties, but in everything else, we are trying to integrate as closely as possible. So as an entity, and we have our secretariat in Guyana, we are now forging a much closer relationship with Africa and with the African Union.
So I love this idea about, I can see, you told me about the picture on the back of your wall, which is done by Barrington Watson. And a lot of his stuff, Jamaican artist, out of many, one people. Okay. And based on what you're saying, it's kind of like Caricom is kind of like the embodiment of that, out of many, one people striving forward to get a better position for the whole of the Caribbean, from not just from a Caribbean perspective, but from an African diaspora perspective and uplifting. Yeah. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. I mean, the Caribbean, the first slave societies, African thousands, tens of thousands, millions of enslaved Africans brought to the Caribbean. When slavery was abolished, the European overlords then turned to Asia, and they brought in similarly the hundreds of thousands of Asian indentured servants, principally from India. So the Caribbean, our Caribbean community is very much an Afro-Asiatic entity. Basically African people and Indian people of Indian origin. That's what principally we are. Of course, we still have some of the European elements and so forth, but in terms of the bulk of our population, we are talking African and Indian, and we are very unique. We are very unique civilization, because we are the civilization that has come out of great oppression. This Caribbean region was the region that perhaps experienced the greatest genocide, the greatest system of terrorism. Our people were placed in locations of extreme evil and barbarity. We had to resist. We had to protect our intrinsic humanity. We have never lost our intrinsic humanity. We had to resist both military, physically, but also culturally and spiritually. And we have humanized these locations of barbarism. It is the oppressed Black people from below. Almost everything that is good and valuable and noble about this Caribbean space has been constructed by the people from below, the Black people from below, So we know that we represent something very unique in the world, And I am at pains to try to bring home that history to our people, to try to bring home the resistance, the transcending of oppression that our ancestors were able to that mission they were able to carry out, and to have a sense of what we must stand for in the world. You know, if there are any people in this world who should champion the values of freedom and human dignity, it is the people of the Caribbean, because that has been our journey. Yeah.
I'm going to just in a second, I'm going to open it up for if anyone has any questions. If they put their hands up as in the usual fashion, then I'll pull in your questions. But I was just also, when you spoke about that, what would you like to see? Because talking about the barbarity which existed within the Caribbean, what would you like to see happen in terms of not retribution, but reparation or anything like that for those who have benefited from our enslavement, from our pain, our suffering? Well, I'm just throwing out the question.
Oh yes, well, I am one of the architects of the reparations movement in the Caribbean. I was enlisted into the reparations movement by one of your Black UK heroes, a man called Bernie Grant, member of Parliament. Bernie reached out to me very early when he had taken up that cause. And I brought Bernie. Bernie came to Barbados, delivered a public address and Bernie would send me all of the information about reparations. So I credit Bernie Grant for really introducing me to the issue. And then of course, I took it from there. People like myself, Sir Hilary Beckles. And so yes, reparations is extremely important. I mean, anybody who knows the history, these European entities, governments, institutions, families, raped our societies for hundreds of years. I mean, our countless generations of Black people were forced to work on the plantations of the Caribbean, and all of the fruits of their labor was siphoned off to Europe, to European institutions and European families. And so yes, restitution is required. The damage that was done has to be repaired. We are saying to those European entities, you cannot victimize a people like this. You cannot steal the fruits of their labor. You cannot simply walk away with your ill-gotten gain and think that that is the end of it. No, we are saying to you, you must come back to the scene of the crime, and you must be engaged in some just effort to repair the damage that you have done. So we are seeing it in several dimensions. Our region, our countries possess a right to development. We possess a right to development, and these powerful European entities that built their power at the expense of our impoverishment are under a duty now to facilitate that development. So the European governments have a responsibility. European institutions that were implicated in those centuries of plunder and enslavement, they have a responsibility. We are conscious as well that the international economic and political order that we exist in today came out of and has its roots in those centuries of enslavement and colonialism, and that we have been inserted in a structurally subservient and exploitative manner, and that has to be corrected as well. So for us, reparations is really a multifaceted campaign with several trajectories, but it's all about really doing justice, and repairing the damage that was done to the victims of those centuries of injustice.
Listen, I totally 100% agree. Listen, I've got another question, but I can see Luke Daniels has his hand up, so I'm gonna ask Luke if you're gonna ask your question, and any other questions that people may have, please just raise your hands. I see Omar as well, so I'm going to go with Luke and then Omar and then William. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much for this discussion. I mean, it's just gripping listening. David, I met you first of all in Venezuela. I don't know if you remember, we were at the Reparations conference, and that's where we was. Prior to that, I was actually in Barbados, and I think we exchanged a phone call, but we never did get to meet. Everybody was saying, "Oh, you must meet this guy, David, if you come to Barbados." So, I was on a mission, but it didn't happen then. And then later on, I think the next time we met again, I think at subsequent time in Venezuela. So that's been great. It's a real pleasure hearing you and hearing you sharing so openly about your life and your journey and so on. Now, the question I wanted to ask you really is about federation, because you spoke passionately about being a Caribbeanist. I am too. One of the purposes for my trip to Barbados was to actually try and make contacts with the trade union and so on, and we were successful in doing that. Spoke to quite a few people. And one of the people I spoke with was George Lamin, because I know he was one who was, around the time of federation and so on. CLS, we were exploring the possibility at the time of a conference in the Caribbean, because as we saw it, the left was so disunited, there wasn't anything happening. We wanted to try and draw people together to get some left thinking happening in the region. And so we were able to meet with George, and he still felt that federation is an issue that, it needs to be revisited. Federation of the West Indies is something that's been going on for centuries, really, because even during the time of the Buccaneers and so on, and the pirates in the Caribbean, the Europeans tried to form some kind of union with some groups, at least if they're under attack, they come to each other's defense. Now in the region, we are faced with bigger difficulties in some ways, with hurricanes and volcanoes and all kinds of stuff happening. As a Guyanese, I know we've got probably more land than anybody else from the Caribbean islands. And I always thought, this could be a place of refuge if, a volcano, for instance, or a hurricane, people wanted to shift and move. I think Caricom is a great idea, and that's happening in some ways, but I feel it needs more of a political holding together, political consciousness, and more of a strategy, actually thinking wider for the whole region, and being able to take big, bold initiatives that people could feel that they're actually part of this Caribbean, because as you know, there's been problems with people coming to Barbados or Jamaica, and people getting strip searched and treated badly, Haitians being locked up in Guyana, and all kinds of stuff that's happening. And we need to have some bigger discussions really about it. I just thought, what were your thoughts about federation?
Well,
Thanks.
I have been ambassador to Caricom now for the past 3 years. And during that 3-year period, I have not heard any discussion in Caricom circles about political union. So it's just not on the table. For the benefit of the audience, when we were still colonial, the British government had brought us together into a colonial federation in 1958. So we, in a sense, we were brought together and made one big colony, with the exception of Guyana. Guyana never became part of that West Indian Federation, but it was a colonial federation. It only lasted for 4 years. It broke up in 1962 when Jamaica asserted its right to withdraw from it, and then Trinidad followed suit. And so the whole thing collapsed, and every country then went to independence singly. And from the collapse of the Federation in 1962, what we have been doing is building back from that separatism that was that was visited upon us in 1962, then we have been gradually building back, coming together. But no one is positing a political coming together where we become just one nation. So it is integration, economic, functional, coordination, trade, but short of this political federation. Now, so it's not in terms of the governing elites, it is not part of the discourse at all. Now, one of the weaknesses of our integration movement still is that it has not, even though it is solid, it exists, and it exists in a more comprehensive way than even a lot of our people imagine. But it has not gripped the popular imagination. So Caricom has not gripped the popular imagination. And I think it is only when it does grip the popular imagination and the masses of the people really buy into it, that issue of coming together as one nation will come back to the fore. So I'm very conscious of this. I'm very conscious that that the structures that we have to be more deeply connected with the people and have to resonate more with the people. At one level, that is going to call for a lot more popular education about integration and about the structures that already exist, but also we are going to have to push aspects of it that give the people more rights, facilitate the people's movement more, and so we can facilitate a greater sense of ownership of the entire. We have to cultivate in each Caribbean citizen a greater sense of ownership of the entire region, the entire Caribbean. So my job is to help foster in the Barbadian a sense that he or she owns the savannas of Guyana, the great rivers of Guyana, the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, the heritage of Bob Marley and Marcus Garvey, etc. See, so I'm very conscious of that. The role I have to try to play is to try to engineer that mass appropriation of the idea of our Caribbean region. So we have some work to do, but it is entirely doable, because unlike a lot of people, they think of Caricom and they think of the Caricom Secretariat in Guyana, but there's a whole much bigger reality that goes way beyond the Caricom Secretariat. So we have something to work with. We have something very substantial to work with. What we have to do now is to make that effort to root it in the people and have it resonate with the people. So that's the next part of the agenda.
Thank you for that question, Luke. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to go to Omar and then to William.
David, thank you very much for sharing with us today. It's been a pleasure to learn more about your life and your history. I just wanted to ask quickly, in light of Barbados wanting to transition from a constitutional monarchy to a full-fledged republic, do you think that what are your thoughts on other Caribbean nations soon following suit?
Yes. Well, I'm pushing that idea that Barbados should be an example, a model. As I said, I am so fortunate to be in a position of influence now, because these are things I would have agitated about that for decades. Barbados, getting rid of the Queen, and elevating one of our own to that position of head of state, and we have made that decision. It is going to happen. So if Barbados could do it, then why not St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Grenada and the others? I mean, Guyana made that transition some years ago. Trinidad and Tobago has made it. Dominica has made it, of course, Haiti led us all in 1804. But Barbados, which was seen as Barbados was the quintessential British colony. I mean, Barbados was known as Little England. Barbados was the mother colony, the British mother colony of the Caribbean. If Barbados can do it, then surely everyone else can do it. And so we have to push that notion that our Caribbean community must be totally free of any sense that the Queen of England will be the head of state of any Caribbean community territory. So yes, I wish you could help me to push that idea. Barbados is going to do it on the 30th, by the 30th of November this year. And let us push that idea to every remaining monarchy in the Caribbean community. Follow the example of Barbados.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Really enjoyed your presentation. Too, I'd say I'm a passionate Pan-Africanist. It's one of my things that I research and work on. So I just wanted to ask you, I suppose, what, from your vantage point, where do you see the future of Pan-Africanism? Because in a sense, we've still come to the tail end of the international decade, people of African descent. But it seems that maybe elite level Pan-Africanism, I think as you alluded to, at the level of leaders, they don't seem to have that drive to really bring about a more conscious unity. So I wonder, from your position, where you kind of see the future and where we might look for, in a sense, tangible positive fruits that's going on at the moment that we might be able to get behind and support.
I think the scaffold upon which we could build the whole structure is reparations. Because correctly understood, reparations links us all together. We Africans in the diaspora, Africans on the continent, and a portion of a segment of reparations as well is that self-repair that we need to do upon ourselves, psychological, cultural, institutional repair. So there's an outward aspect of reparations where we level these charges at our historical oppressors, and even on a wider scale at the whole international political and economic order. But there's another segment where we look inward. So I think reparations is the scaffold. We have to make reparations a mass movement, though. We have to make it. We have to, again, just like how we have to root Caribbean integration in the masses, we have to do a similar thing with reparations. I keep saying that we have to. The model for us should be the anti-apartheid movement. The movement to bring down apartheid in South Africa was developed into an international mass movement. We have to do a similar job with reparations. So we have to turn on the masses of our people in the Caribbean and Africa and across the diaspora to reparations, and use reparations to build all of those connections. Now, in Caricom, we are making steps in that direction. We have this Caricom Reparations Commission. It's a governmental commission, but there have been recent decisions taken by our heads of state that we need to broaden its membership, and we need to make greater efforts to reach out to the mass of our people. We also have taken decision that we have to invite the African continent to come on board. We recognize that a lot of the early impetus to reparations came from Africa. I said that my introduction came from Bernie Grant in Britain, but Chief Moshood Abiola of Nigeria and Jamaica's Ambassador Dudley Thompson, they did the work in the early 90s to bring reparations back to the fore, to establish the Organization of African Unity's group of eminent persons on reparations. So we got a lot of our early inspiration from the OAU and from work being done on the African continent. Yet, when the OAU became defunct and the new African Union was established, they did not replicate in the African Union all of those reparations initiatives. So, I mean, the irony of it now is that Caricom is now reaching out to Africa to say, hey, we want to reintroduce you to this thing that you introduced us to. And we are inviting you to come on board, with us. So we are writing to every single African head of government, inviting them to join us. We are also in conversation with the African Union. We are proposing two summits, two Caricom African Union summits. One, just a general summit to deal with developing the relationship between the two institutions. But secondly, a specific reparations summit. And we are saying to them, let the Caribbean and Africa meet in and have a reparations summit as a prelude to both the Caribbean and Africa engaging with the governments of Europe in a follow-up reparations summit, right? So reparations, but reparations transformed into a mass movement. That is where I think we are going to build. We are going to truly build this Pan-African movement. But don't gainsay the efforts made at the elite level by government. So, for example, in Barbados, right now we are establishing an embassy in Ghana and also one in Kenya. You know, and for me, these are important developments. I mean, our people, once we get that embassy in these two African countries, then it is for us now to make use of those institutions so that our people, we use them to facilitate much greater movement and engagement of our people. So we have to use all of these official structures, even if we see them as high-level structures, we have to use them constructively to facilitate the masses of our people, you know. But that's work that we you know, I'm in a sense in government, but I always see myself as an activist, as a as a people's activist, and that's the mindset we have to bring to all of this kind of high-level, quote unquote, elite work.
David, thank you so much. You know what? I could sit down and I could listen to you for hours. I'm not joking. There's so much knowledge, education, wisdom, insight that you bring to the table. It is an absolute pleasure to have you with us this morning for you. He's coming live from the Caribbean here, people, so it's morning for him there. I want to ask one more question, but I am so wary that we are already over time. All right. And so I'm going to just leave a notion. And I don't want to put it on a downer, but I'm just thinking one of the things which somebody put in the chat was it will allow the European nations to demonstrate their humanity. Okay. And I just wonder, with this argument for reparation, one of the biggest barriers will be recognition, acknowledgement, and the willingness to repay what they have gained. How do we overcome that? What do we need to do?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely correct. As ambassador to Caricom, I am able to read all the letters that the various heads of government of Europe wrote to Caricom, you know, because Caricom wrote to them all. So I'm able to read David Cameron's letter and you know, all the rest of them. And as you say, each of them, oh yes, it was regrettable, but no willingness to discuss. So we understand, and that's one of the reasons it has to be a mass movement as well. This is going to be a fight. I think it was Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a struggle. So it's going to be a fight, and we are going to have to mobilize our forces within these European countries itself, our diaspora, but also our natural allies, the trade unions, the churches, the people who believe in justice. And as I said, just like the apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid movement, where you had important white allies in that struggle, that has to be our model. So we know that we are in a struggle, but we know that justice and truth and righteousness is on our side. And where you have justice, truth, and righteousness on your side, all you have to do is pursue your cause with determination and vigor, and you are certain to be victorious. So I think that's the confidence we must have. We are going to be victorious. It's only a matter of time, but we have to mobilize our allies right across the board. And finally, I know time is running out, so I want to say that Imperial College, I want to urge you to look at a relationship with the University of the West Indies. Very, I mean, the University of the West Indies is the quintessential Caribbean integration institution. It is an institution in a very good place. Its Vice Chancellor is Sir Hilary Beckles, the acknowledged champion of reparations. It has developed the Caricom Reparations Research Center. So it is in a good position to become a truly activist social justice institution. I mean, with that kind of leadership, we have the potential to develop our University of the West Indies into an institution that facilitates notions of social justice and activism in the young tertiary trained population of the Caribbean. So it is a kind of university that I would love to see a deep relationship between Imperial College and the Black and minority elements of Imperial College and the University of the West Indies.
David, we're going to make that happen. We're going to make that happen. It's an absolutely brilliant idea. Yeah. And so we'll be in discussions. This is just the first of many conversations, because I think it's something which sets I know that Glasgow have got, the University of Glasgow have got some links. I think other institutions in England, not just in Scotland, also need to demonstrate and step up to the mark. And so as part of someone who's working within the Imperial College thing, I haven't got much influence, but whatever one, I'm going to take a leaf from your book, from what you've said, and start poking in the right places, right? I'm going to start poking and start setting those ideas in making them a reality. David, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on here today. And I just want to extend my thanks and gratitude, not just to yourself, but to also Omar, who was the one who gave us the introductions at the start. So thank you very, very much.
No, thank you, and thank you for all those very kind sentiments. They are much appreciated.
No, they're true, I tell you. I'm going to just explain what we're doing next week. And it just so happens that next week we are going to have Omar himself. So Omar is going to be our guest next week, and he's a data bank assistant at Imperial College in the outreach department. So please tune in and hear Omar on his quest for belonging. And if you haven't seen any of the belongings before, then you can go to our YouTube page, where you'll see many other interviews which we've had over the past year of the Belonging series. And all I would like to say now is just say another big thank you to our guests, and try and encourage others to attend as well. So that was really great. Thank you very much, David, and we will see you all later.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all.
Yeah. A pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, tomorrow, look forward to it.